You click buy. The ticket says $45. You feel fine about that. Then the next screen loads. Service fee, facility fee, processing fee, delivery fee for a ticket that lives on your phone. By the time you reach checkout, $45 has become $78. You didn't imagine that. You didn't misread the price. What happened to you has a name, and it isn't an accident. It's the business model. And the company running it isn't just selling you a ticket. It owns almost everything else in the building, too. Rewind to 2010. Two companies existed separately back then. Ticketmaster sold the tickets. Live Nation promoted the tours, booked the arenas, and managed some of the biggest artists on earth. They were rivals, in theory. Then they merged. The Department of Justice reviewed the deal and approved it, on one condition. Live Nation Entertainment couldn't punish venues that used a different ticketing company. That condition became one of the most quietly violated promises in corporate America. Here's what almost nobody understood at the time. A company that promotes the tour, owns or manages the venue, and controls the ticketing software isn't really three companies wearing different hats. It's one company deciding what you pay at every single stage of the transaction and reporting to no one but itself. Economists have a term for this: vertical integration. It sounds harmless in a textbook. In practice, it means there's no competitor left to keep prices honest because the same company is on every side of the deal. You might be thinking, so what? Prices go up. That happens. But ask yourself something. Why does a ticket that costs $45 end up costing you $78? Specifically through fees added at the very last step of checkout after you've already committed to buying. There's a name for that too. Drip pricing. Researchers at Cornell studied this exact pattern in 2019, led by economist Vicky Morwitz, and found something uncomfortable about human decision-making. Once you've mentally committed to a purchase, once you've already pictured yourself at the concert, you become far less price sensitive to fees added afterward than you would have been if you'd seen the full price up front. Companies aren't guessing about this. They're using decades of behavioral research to decide exactly when to reveal the real cost, not before you want the ticket, but after you already do. Live Nation Entertainment controls or operates over 265 concert venues in North America alone. It promotes upwards of 40,000 events a year. It manages artists directly, which means in some cases, the same company deciding where a tour goes is also the company selling you the ticket to get in. When one entity sits on every side of a transaction, the market stops behaving like a market. There's no competing ticketing platform undercutting the fees, because most major venues under Live Nation's umbrella are contractually or practically locked into using Ticketmaster. This isn't the first time this exact fight has happened. In 1994, Pearl Jam tried to tour without using Ticketmaster at all. The band filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, arguing the company's fees and exclusive venue contracts amounted to an illegal monopoly. Government investigators looked into it. The case eventually went nowhere, and Pearl Jam quietly returned to using Ticketmaster within a few years, because there was, functionally, no other way to book a national tour. Think about what that means. 30 years ago, one of the biggest bands in the world tried to opt out of this system and couldn't. That's not a story about one company being clever. That's a story about a company controlling the infrastructure so completely that even massive leverage couldn't dent it. Then came November 2022. Taylor Swift announced the Eras Tour. Ticketmaster's system, built to handle high demand, buckled under 14 million people trying to buy tickets at once, including an estimated 10 times more bot traffic than the system was designed to absorb. The sale collapsed. Fans who waited in a digital queue for hours got nothing. Resale tickets appeared almost instantly at 4 or 5, sometimes 10 times face value, Congress noticed. In January 2023, senators from both parties hauled Live Nation's president into a hearing room, and Senator Amy Klobuchar said something that captured the moment perfectly. She said she'd never seen a room this unified, Republicans and Democrats agreeing on one thing, that Ticketmaster's dominance had gone too far. But hearings aren't lawsuits, and for over a decade, nothing structural changed. You might wonder how a company survives a moment like that with its reputation still intact enough to keep operating at full scale. Part of the answer is that outrage, on its own, doesn't restructure a market. Legal scholar Tim Wu, who has written extensively on monopoly power in the United States, has argued that modern antitrust enforcement spent decades treating consumer prices as the only harm worth measuring, ignoring what happens to competitors, to artists, to venues when one company controls the pipes the entire industry runs through. Under that older standard, Ticketmaster's fees alone might not have been enough to trigger action. It took the collapse of an entire ticket sale, watched live by millions of people, to make the structural argument impossible to ignore. Then in May 2024, the Department of Justice, joined by 30 state attorneys general, filed an antitrust lawsuit against Live Nation Entertainment. Not a fine, not a warning. A lawsuit asking a federal court to break the company apart, to separate ticketing from promotion from venue ownership, the way things were supposed to work before 2010. The DOJ's complaint didn't call this a story about one bad merger. It called it a monopoly, sustained for years, that raised costs for fans, squeezed venues, and made it nearly impossible for a competing ticketing platform to survive. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. This isn't a case of a company breaking the law in secret. Ticketmaster's fees are visible. Its market share is public. Its ownership of venues is filed in plain documents anyone can read. The entire structure has operated in the open for over a decade, and it took this long for federal regulators to formally challenge it. Why? Because proving monopoly harm in court is slow, expensive, and the burden of proof sits entirely on the government, not the company. Meanwhile, every day that lawsuit takes to resolve is another day of full-price tickets carrying invisible fees, priced by an entity with no real competitor watching over its shoulder. You've probably heard people call this inflation. It isn't. Inflation raises the price of a candy bar because ingredients and labor cost more. This is different. The face value price of the ticket barely moved. What ballooned were the fees layered on top, the parts of the price a monopoly can charge simply because you have nowhere else to go. Studies from the Government Accountability Office found that fees can account for more than 20% of a ticket's total price, and in high-demand cases, considerably more. That isn't a market responding to costs. That's a market responding to control. And there's a psychological layer to this you're probably not noticing, even now. Every fee is labeled separately: service fee, facility fee, order processing fee, instead of bundled into one number. Behavioral economists call this fee fragmentation, and it isn't decorative. Splitting one large cost into several smaller ones makes each individual fee feel less significant, even when the total is identical or higher than if it were shown as one line. Your brain evaluates 5 small numbers differently than it evaluates one big one, even when the math is the same. That's not you being bad at arithmetic. That's a system engineered around how arithmetic actually feels to a human being under time pressure, staring at a countdown clock telling you your tickets might sell out in the next 4 minutes. There's also the resale market to consider, and it's stranger than most people realize. When tickets sell out in minutes, a secondary market appears almost instantly, often selling the same seats for 3, 5, sometimes 10 times face value. You might assume that money goes to scalpers alone. In many cases, it doesn't. Ticketmaster itself operates a resale platform, meaning the same company can profit twice on a single seat, once at face value and again when that seat resurfaces at a markup on its own resale exchange. A 2018 CBC and Toronto Star investigation sent undercover reporters to a Ticketmaster event for scalpers and recorded company representatives explaining, in detail, how professional resellers could use Ticketmaster's own systems to move large quantities of tickets for profit. Ticketmaster denied wrongdoing at the time and said the employees involved violated internal policy. But the investigation revealed something the fine print never will, that a system marketed as protecting fans from scalping was, in practice, deeply entangled with it. So where does this actually go? The DOJ's lawsuit is still working through the courts as of this recording, and a breakup, if it happens, would take years to fully unwind. Live Nation has argued publicly that fees fund the events themselves, that ticket resale markets and inflated fan demand are the real culprits, not their business structure. Some economists agree the picture is more complicated than a single villain. Touring costs have genuinely risen, artists take a larger cut than they did decades ago, and demand for live experiences has exploded since the pandemic reshaped how people spend on entertainment. This isn't a story with one clean answer. But complexity doesn't mean the structural problem disappears. Even critics who acknowledge rising costs point out that a company controlling supply, demand, and price simultaneously has little incentive to ever let those costs come down. Consider, too, what this looks like from the artist's side, because it isn't always adversarial the way you might expect. Some musicians openly benefit from the system, negotiating a cut of the platform fees themselves, which means the same company you're frustrated with at checkout may be quietly splitting that markup with the very artist you're excited to see. Other artists have fought against it publicly. In 2022, several acts spoke out in support of fans locked out of the Eras Tour sale, and some smaller artists have started experimenting with independent ticketing platforms specifically to route around Ticketmaster's fees. Those experiments rarely scale, though, because the venues themselves are often tied to Live Nation through long-term contracts that predate the artist's involvement entirely. The person performing on stage frequently has less control over your ticket price than you'd assume. What you're left with is this: the next time you watch that price climb from $40, $5 to 78 in the space of one checkout page, you're not imagining a glitch, and you're not failing to shop smart enough. You're looking at the outcome of a single company sitting on every side of the table. The venue, the promoter, the platform. Deciding, with no one to answer to, exactly how much of your excitement it can convert into revenue before you notice. You click buy. The ticket says $45. This time you know exactly why it never really was.